My chest hurts so much, the little girl whispered, and those 5 trembling words stopped a millionaire CEO more completely than any board meeting, market crash, or billion-dollar decision ever had. Snow drifted softly across the quiet streets of downtown Minneapolis, settling over parked cars, empty benches, and the bare branches lining the sidewalk as if the city itself had decided to move a little slower that afternoon. Most people hurried by with their collars raised against the December wind, carrying shopping bags, warm coffee, and thoughts of getting home before another storm rolled in. No one noticed the small figure sitting alone beneath the faded shelter of an old bus stop. Wrapped in a thin cream-colored sweater that was far too light for the weather, the little girl sat perfectly still with both hands pressed carefully against her chest. Her blonde hair, tangled by the wind, partially covered a pale face that looked far too tired for someone who couldn't have been older than 7. She wasn't crying. She wasn't asking strangers for money. She wasn't even looking up. She simply watched the falling snow with quiet eyes, as though she had accepted that the world might keep moving without ever seeing her. Across the street, Ethan Carter stepped out of a black SUV that gleamed beneath the gray winter sky. At 42, he had become one of the youngest healthcare technology CEOs in the country, a man whose company appeared on magazine covers and financial headlines almost every week. Investors admired him. Employees respected him. Reporters called him visionary. Yet none of those words followed him once the car door closed. They stayed behind with the cameras, while Ethan carried something much heavier wherever he went. His charcoal overcoat fit perfectly, his polished shoes left neat prints in the fresh snow, and the expensive watch beneath his sleeve remained frozen at exactly 4:17, the same time it had stopped nearly 4 years earlier. He had never repaired it. Some things weren't meant to move forward. His assistant had suggested taking a different route to the charity gala waiting downtown, but for reasons he couldn't explain, Ethan had asked the driver to stop several blocks away so he could walk the rest of the distance alone. Solitude had become easier than conversation. The city decorations sparkled around him. Store windows glowed with wreaths, ribbons, and golden lights. Families laughed as children pointed excitedly toward decorated displays. Couples walked hand in hand beneath oversized snowflakes hanging from street lamps. Ethan noticed none of it until a quiet cough drifted across the sidewalk. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of cough people barely hear before continuing on with their day. But something about it made him glance toward the bus stop. At first he thought the bench was empty except for a forgotten backpack. Then the small figure shifted. He slowed his pace. She looked impossibly tiny against the blanket of white gathering around her shoes. For a second, he almost kept walking. His calendar was full. Hundreds of people were expecting him across town. Every minute had already been scheduled before sunrise. Then the little girl slowly lifted her head. Their eyes met only briefly before she looked away again. Ethan noticed the way her breathing seemed careful, almost measured, as though every breath required more effort than the last. He crossed the street without thinking. Snow crunched beneath each step until he stopped a few feet away, careful not to frighten her. "Hey there," he said gently. "Are you waiting for someone?" The little girl hesitated before offering the smallest shake of her head. Her lips were pale from the cold. Ethan crouched to bring himself closer to her eye level. "Do you have a name?" Another pause. Then, barely above the whisper of the falling snow, she answered, "Lily." The name lingered between them. Ethan managed a soft smile. "I'm Ethan." Lily tried to smile back, but instead one tiny hand tightened against the center of her sweater. Her breathing caught for just a moment. Ethan's expression changed instantly. "Are you okay?" She swallowed, lowered her eyes to the sidewalk, and whispered so quietly he almost didn't hear her. "My chest hurts so much." Before Ethan could answer, Lily leaned slightly forward as though the strength had quietly slipped away from her small body, and in that single fragile moment, every appointment, every meeting, every expectation waiting somewhere else simply disappeared. The moment Lily's knees gave way, Ethan caught her before she could slip from the bench onto the frozen sidewalk. She felt impossibly light in his arms, lighter than any child should have been, and the cold that clung to her sweater seemed to reach straight through his expensive coat. Her breathing remained steady but shallow, each careful breath sounding as though it carried more effort than a child should ever have to spend. She blinked slowly, trying to apologize even as her eyes struggled to stay open. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I did not mean to scare you." Ethan swallowed the tightness rising in his throat. "You did not scare me," he answered quietly. "You just need some help." She looked at him with uncertain blue eyes, almost as if she expected those words to disappear before they reached her. Around them, people continued walking through the snowy afternoon. A few glanced toward the bus stop before hurrying on, believing someone else had already taken responsibility. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, speaking calmly as he requested immediate medical assistance. His voice remained steady, but inside, something unfamiliar had begun to stir. It was not panic. It was something older, something he had spent years burying beneath deadlines, earnings reports, and endless meetings. While they waited, he carefully removed his thick wool scarf and wrapped it around Lily's shoulders. She instinctively tried to hand it back. "It is too nice," she murmured. "You will get cold." Ethan almost smiled. Even now, she worried about someone else. "I have another one," he said gently, even though he did not. She accepted the scarf only after a long hesitation, holding the soft fabric close beneath her chin. A few snowflakes melted in her pale eyelashes as she looked toward the cloudy sky. "It is pretty," she whispered. "Snow always makes everything look clean." Ethan followed her gaze without answering. He had spent years believing beautiful things could hide broken ones. His company built medical technology that helped hospitals across the country, yet somehow, the smallest patient he had ever met had been sitting alone only a few blocks away from his office. The distant sound of approaching sirens echoed through the streets. Lily turned toward him again, her fingers tightening slightly around the scarf. "Do they cost a lot?" she asked. Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" "Ambulances," she answered softly. "I do not have money." The words landed heavier than the winter air surrounding them. Ethan leaned a little closer so she would not have to strain to hear him. "You do not need to think about any of that. I promise." She searched his face as though trying to decide whether promises were real things. "People usually leave," she admitted after a moment. "Sometimes they say they will come back." Ethan did not answer immediately. He realized he had heard countless promises during business negotiations, promises measured in contracts and signatures. This one felt entirely different. "I am not leaving," he said quietly. "Not today." For the first time since he had met her, the corners of Lily's mouth lifted into the faintest smile. It lasted only a second before another wave of discomfort crossed her face. Ethan gently supported her as the ambulance pulled to the curb. The paramedics moved with calm efficiency, asking simple questions while placing a warm blanket around her shoulders. Before they helped her onto the stretcher, Lily reached for Ethan's sleeve with surprising determination. Her small fingers barely wrapped around the fabric, yet the gesture stopped him completely. "Will you still be there?" she asked in a voice so fragile it nearly disappeared beneath the falling snow. Ethan looked into her tired eyes and answered without the slightest hesitation. "When you open your eyes, you will see me." As the ambulance doors closed, he climbed inside beside her instead of returning to the waiting sport utility vehicle, leaving behind the gala, the speeches, and every obligation that had once seemed so important, because for reasons he still could not fully explain, the only place in the world he wanted to be was wherever that little girl was going. The emergency room was warm, bright, and filled with the familiar rhythm of monitors, quiet conversations, and footsteps echoing across polished floors. Nurses guided Lily gently through the admissions process while Ethan remained only a few feet away, refusing every polite suggestion that he wait in the lobby. He watched as a pediatric nurse knelt beside Lily instead of standing over her, speaking softly enough to earn the child's cautious attention. "You are safe here," she said with a reassuring smile. Lily nodded, but before answering any questions, her eyes searched the room until they found Ethan again. Only after seeing him still standing there did her shoulders relax ever so slightly. A physician arrived moments later and completed a careful examination while another nurse placed a warm blanket around Lily's legs. Her temperature was low from spending hours outside, and her heartbeat carried an irregular rhythm that prompted the medical team to begin additional testing immediately. Blood work, an electrocardiogram, and imaging were ordered without delay. Throughout every step, Lily apologized repeatedly. "I am sorry for taking everyone's time," she whispered. The nurse gently brushed a loose strand of blonde hair away from her face. "Sweetheart, helping you is exactly why we are here." Lily lowered her eyes. "Hospitals cost money." Ethan finally stepped closer. "You do not have to worry about that." She looked at him with quiet uncertainty. "Really?" "Really," he answered without hesitation. "Everything you need will be taken care of." She seemed relieved, but only for a moment. Then another concern appeared across her face. "Can I leave after they make my chest stop hurting?" The question silenced everyone nearby. It was not the question of a child afraid of doctors. It was the question of someone already planning how quickly she could disappear again without becoming a burden. The physician exchanged a brief glance with the charge nurse before smiling warmly. "Let us find out what your heart is trying to tell us first." Lily accepted the answer with remarkable calm, almost as though she had grown accustomed to waiting for pain to pass on its own. While the tests continued, Ethan remained seated beside her bed. His phone vibrated again and again inside his coat pocket. His assistant. His board members. Reporters asking why he had missed the charity gala. Without reading a single message, he silenced the device and placed it face down on the chair beside him. For the first time in years, the world outside that hospital room simply stopped mattering. A pediatric technician arrived carrying a small machine for the heart scan. Seeing the unfamiliar equipment, Lily instinctively reached for the edge of the blanket. Ethan noticed immediately. "Would it help if I stayed right here?" he asked. She nodded almost invisibly. "Please." He pulled his chair closer and remained beside her while the technician completed every measurement. Lily never once complained. She only watched the ceiling quietly, breathing slowly whenever discomfort returned. After the examination, the physician stepped into the hallway with Ethan. His expression remained calm but thoughtful. "She appears to have gone without regular medical care for quite some time," he explained. "She is underweight, exhausted, and we are seeing signs that suggest an underlying heart condition that may have been present since birth. We need additional evaluation before we know exactly what we are dealing with, but I strongly recommend admitting her tonight." Ethan looked through the glass window toward Lily, who had already drifted into a light sleep beneath the warm blanket. One tiny hand still rested over her chest even in her dreams. "Whatever she needs," Ethan said quietly. "Do it." As the physician nodded and walked away to arrange the next steps, Ethan remained by the window, his eyes never leaving the little girl. For years he had built machines designed to help doctors save lives, yet standing there, he realized something painfully simple. Technology could monitor a heartbeat. Medicine could treat a heart. But sometimes what a frightened child needed most was the certainty that when she opened her eyes again, someone would still be sitting beside her. Morning arrived quietly beyond the hospital window, painting the snow outside with soft shades of silver and gold. Inside Lily's room, the steady rhythm of the heart monitor blended with the gentle hum of the heating system, creating a calm that neither of them had expected to find. When Lily slowly opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was Ethan sitting in the same chair where she had left him the night before. His tie had been loosened, his overcoat folded neatly across another chair, and an untouched cup of coffee rested beside him, now completely cold. He looked up the moment he noticed her moving. "Good morning," he said with a warm smile. "You kept your promise," Lily whispered. Ethan nodded. "I told you I would be here." A tiny smile appeared on her face before quickly fading as she remembered where she was. "Am I allowed to stay?" she asked quietly. "You are exactly where you need to be," he replied. "The doctors want to help your heart feel stronger." She accepted the answer with surprising trust. A nurse entered carrying a breakfast tray with oatmeal, fresh fruit, scrambled eggs, and a small carton of milk. The delicious smell filled the room, yet Lily simply stared at the tray without reaching for it. "Is something wrong?" the nurse asked kindly. Lily hesitated before speaking. "Can I save some for later?" The nurse smiled gently. "If you are still hungry later, we will bring you more." Lily looked genuinely surprised. "More," she repeated. "As much as you need," the nurse answered. Ethan watched quietly as Lily picked up the spoon with careful hands, eating slowly as though she expected someone to tell her to stop at any moment. She thanked the nurse after every few bites, apologizing whenever she accidentally dropped a piece of fruit onto the tray. There was a quiet politeness about her that did not belong to childhood alone. It came from learning to ask for as little as possible. Later that morning, Ethan excused himself for a short time and returned carrying a small paper shopping bag from a nearby children's store. Lily looked at it curiously. "What is that?" she asked. "Just something I thought you might like." He carefully placed the bag on her lap. Inside was a soft blue pair of pajamas decorated with tiny snowflakes, warm, fuzzy socks, a small stuffed polar bear, and a coloring book with a brand new box of crayons. Lily stared at the gifts without touching them. For several long seconds she simply looked from the bag to Ethan and back again. "These are for me," she finally whispered. "Every one of them." Tears gathered quietly in her blue eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. "Nobody has ever bought me pajamas before," she admitted softly. Ethan felt something tighten deep inside his chest. Lily carefully picked up the little polar bear and hugged it close without saying another word. The nurse returned to help Lily change into the clean pajamas while Ethan stepped into the hallway. There he was greeted by the hospital social worker, who introduced herself with a calm, reassuring smile. She explained that they had not yet located a parent or guardian listed for Lily and would begin looking into her background immediately. Ethan listened carefully, asking only one question before she left. "Until you find the answers, she will not be alone, will she?" The social worker glanced through the small window into Lily's room, where the little girl was now sitting comfortably on the bed, gently coloring a picture while the stuffed polar bear rested beside her pillow. She smiled knowingly before looking back at Ethan. "From what I have seen since last night," she said softly, "I do not think she is alone anymore." Ethan looked through the glass once more as Lily proudly held up her drawing for him to see. It showed a little girl standing beneath falling snow beside a tall man wrapped in a long dark coat, both smiling beneath a bright winter sky. At the very top she had written in careful, uneven letters, "Home feels warm even before you get there." That afternoon the hospital hallway grew quieter as visiting hours slowed, but inside the small conference room beside the pediatric wing, new pieces of Lily's story began to surface one by one. Ethan sat across from the hospital social worker, whose folder now contained several pages of notes gathered from public records, school contacts, and local outreach organizations. She spoke gently, careful not to turn a child's life into a list of facts. "We were able to identify her," she said. "Lily Brooks. 7 years old." Ethan listened without interrupting. Her mother, Hannah Brooks, passed away almost 9 months ago after a long illness. There are no records showing that Lily's father was ever listed on her birth certificate. Ethan lowered his eyes for a moment. "What happened after her mother died?" The social worker turned another page. "Neighbors tried helping for a while. A local church brought groceries. Her mother had been homeschooling her during the final months because of frequent medical appointments. After Hannah passed away, Lily moved from one temporary place to another. She never stayed anywhere very long. Ethan felt a quiet ache settle inside him. And her heart condition? Medical records show doctors suspected a congenital heart problem several years ago. Hannah scheduled follow-up appointments, but after losing her job and health insurance, she could not continue treatment. Silence filled the room. Ethan looked through the conference room window toward the snow falling outside, wondering how many times that little girl had hidden her pain simply because there had been nowhere to go. The social worker reached into the folder again and carefully placed a small clear evidence envelope on the table. Inside rested a worn silver key attached to a faded blue ribbon. "This was found in Lily's coat pocket," she explained. "We located the storage unit it belongs to." Later that evening, Ethan accompanied the social worker to the small storage facility on the edge of the city. Inside the narrow unit there were only a handful of belongings. A neatly folded quilt. 2 cardboard boxes filled with children's books. A tiny wooden rocking horse with chipped white paint. An old suitcase containing carefully washed clothes that Lily had clearly outgrown. Resting on top of the suitcase was a weathered journal wrapped inside a knitted scarf. Tucked between its pages they discovered a sealed envelope with one sentence written carefully across the front. "For Lily, when she is old enough to understand." The social worker looked at Ethan before gently opening the letter to verify its contents. Her eyes softened as she silently read the first few lines. After a long pause, she quietly handed it to Ethan. The handwriting was graceful but slightly uneven. "My sweet Lily, if you are reading this, it means I could not stay as long as I wanted. Please never believe that you were left because you were not loved. You were loved every single day of my life. If your chest hurts again, promise me you will tell someone. Do not hide your pain just because you are afraid of being a burden. Somewhere there is still kindness in this world. Let someone help you carry what I no longer can." Ethan stopped reading for a moment as emotion tightened his throat. The final sentence nearly stole his breath. "And to the person who chooses to stay beside my little girl when I no longer can, thank you for reminding her that she never has to face this world alone." Ethan folded the letter with extraordinary care before looking around the quiet storage unit once more. There was no wealth there. No possessions of value. Only evidence that a mother had spent every ounce of strength she possessed trying to leave behind a little dignity, a little warmth, and a little hope for the daughter she loved beyond measure. As they locked the storage unit and stepped back into the cold evening air, Ethan slipped the letter safely into the inside pocket of his coat, directly over his own heart, silently making a promise that neither snow nor time would ever erase. The following morning, a team of pediatric specialists gathered with Ethan in a quiet consultation room to explain the results of Lily's tests. The lead cardiologist spoke with calm confidence, pointing to simple diagrams rather than complicated medical terms. Lily had been born with a heart condition that had gradually become more difficult for her small body to manage as she grew. The good news, he explained, was that modern treatment offered an excellent chance for recovery if they acted soon. Surgery would be necessary, followed by careful rehabilitation, regular checkups, and a stable home where she could finally rest without fear. Ethan listened to every word, asking thoughtful questions until he fully understood the plan. There was only one answer he ever gave when the discussion turned to cost or long-term care. "Whatever she needs, we will make sure she receives it." Later that afternoon, Lily sat quietly beside the hospital window, the little stuffed polar bear resting in her lap while gentle snow continued drifting across the city outside. She had colored nearly every page in her new coloring book except one, saving the final page for something she called a special picture. When Ethan entered carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate, one for himself and one made especially for children, her face brightened immediately. "You came back," she said with a smile that no longer seemed uncertain. "I said I would." He handed her the warm cup, carefully checking that it was not too hot before placing it in her hands. They sat together watching the snow for several quiet minutes until Lily finally spoke. "The doctor told me they have to fix my heart." Ethan nodded gently. "They do." She looked down into her cup. Tiny marshmallows floated slowly across the surface. "Will it hurt?" The question was barely louder than a whisper. Ethan answered honestly, refusing to make promises that medicine alone could not guarantee. "You may feel uncomfortable for a little while afterward, but the doctors will take very good care of you every step of the way. Their job is to help your heart become stronger." Lily thought about that for a long moment before asking the question she had clearly been carrying all day. "Will you still be here when I wake up?" Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his coat where Hannah's letter still rested over his heart. He could almost hear the words written by a mother who had hoped kindness would someday find her daughter. Looking into Lily's blue eyes, he spoke with complete certainty. "Yes. Even if the day feels long, even if the surgery takes many hours, the first face you will see when you open your eyes will be mine." Lily's shoulders relaxed as though an invisible weight had quietly slipped away. She reached into the bedside drawer and carefully pulled out the picture she had been saving. It showed two hearts colored bright red. One was very small. The other was much larger. Between them she had drawn a simple blue scarf blowing through falling snow. Above the picture she had written in careful block letters, "Thank you for staying." Ethan accepted the drawing as though it were the most valuable gift he had ever received. His expensive awards filled shelves inside his office, but none of them carried the meaning held inside a single sheet of construction paper colored by a little girl who had almost stopped believing people kept their promises. As evening settled over the hospital, a nurse arrived to explain the schedule for the next morning's procedure. Lily listened carefully, nodding after every sentence. Before turning off the room lights, the nurse smiled warmly and wished them both a peaceful night. Ethan pulled his chair closer to Lily's bed exactly as he had done every evening since they met. Lily hugged the little polar bear beneath her blanket, looked toward Ethan one last time, and whispered, "Good night, Mr. Ethan." He smiled softly. "Good night, Lily. Tomorrow is the beginning of your new heart, and I will be here for every beat that follows." The hospital felt unusually quiet before sunrise, as though even the building understood the importance of the day ahead. Outside, fresh snow covered the sidewalks in a smooth blanket of white, while inside the pediatric floor, soft lights glowed gently against pale blue walls. Nurses moved calmly from room to room, speaking in low voices that carried reassurance instead of urgency. Lily had already changed into her hospital gown and sat upright in bed with the little polar bear resting beside her pillow. She held the blue scarf Ethan had wrapped around her on the day they met, running her small fingers across the fabric as if it carried warmth that reached far beyond the cold winter afternoon when everything had changed. Ethan arrived before dawn, exactly as he had promised. He carried no briefcase, no laptop, and no phone in his hands. Every business meeting scheduled for that day had been cancelled with a single message sent before sunrise. For the first time since becoming the leader of his company, an entire board of directors would gather without him. Surprisingly, he felt no regret. There was only one place he needed to be. Lily smiled the moment she saw him. "You are early," she said softly. Ethan laughed gently. "I wanted to make sure you did not wake up before I got here." She looked relieved. "I was afraid I might." A nurse entered carrying a warm blanket and carefully explained each step that would happen next. Lily listened politely, asking only one question when the explanation ended. "Can Mr. Ethan walk with me?" The nurse smiled. "He certainly can." A few minutes later, the orderly arrived with the hospital bed that would carry Lily to the operating suite. Before leaving the room, she reached beneath her pillow and carefully handed Ethan the drawing she had made the night before. On the back she had written one more sentence in careful handwriting. "Please keep this safe until I come back." Ethan folded the picture carefully and placed it inside the same coat pocket where Hannah's letter rested. The two pieces of paper lay together over his heart. As the bed rolled slowly through the hallway, Ethan walked beside her, never once letting go of her hand. Hospital staff greeted Lily with encouraging smiles as they passed, and several nurses who had cared for her during the week wished her luck. Near the entrance to the operating area, the surgeon stepped forward with quiet confidence and knelt beside her bed. "We are ready whenever you are," he said kindly. Lily nodded, then turned toward Ethan one last time. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything. If I get scared before I fall asleep, what should I think about?" Ethan looked at the little girl whose courage had quietly transformed every corner of his own life. "Think about the picture you drew," he answered. "Think about the snow falling outside. Think about the day you will run through it without your chest hurting anymore. And remember that someone will be waiting for you the entire time." Lily squeezed his hand gently. "Promise?" "I promise." The nurse carefully guided the bed through the double doors, and they slowly closed between them. Ethan remained standing exactly where Lily had last seen him until the doors could no longer move. Hours passed one by one. The waiting room grew brighter as morning turned into afternoon. His phone continued vibrating with messages from executives, reporters, and investors. He never looked at a single one. Instead, he quietly unfolded Lily's drawing and Hannah's letter, reading them both again while the untouched cup of coffee beside him slowly became cold. At one point he glanced down at the old watch on his wrist, the one that had remained frozen at 4:17 for years. Without thinking, he gently turned the crown to wind it. A faint ticking filled the silence. Ethan stared at it in disbelief as the second hand began moving again, slowly, steadily, one quiet beat after another. At that exact moment, the operating room doors opened, and the surgeon stepped into the hallway with a gentle smile already beginning to form across his face. The surgeon's smile reached Ethan before the words did, and in that single moment, the weight he had carried since the operating room doors closed seemed to lift from his shoulders. "Everything went very well," the doctor said. "The procedure was successful, and her heart responded exactly as we hoped. She will need time to recover, but we expect her to have a healthy future." Ethan closed his eyes for just a second, releasing a quiet breath he had not realized he had been holding for hours. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "Thank you for giving her that future." The surgeon placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "She is a remarkable little girl. Her determination will help carry her through the rest of her recovery." A short while later, a nurse invited Ethan into the pediatric recovery room. The lights were dim, and the room felt peaceful, filled only with the gentle rhythm of monitors and the soft hum of medical equipment. Lily rested quietly beneath a warm blanket, her tiny hand still wrapped around the little blue scarf the nurse had placed beside her pillow before she woke. Ethan pulled his chair close to the bed exactly as he always had and waited without saying a word. Minutes passed slowly until Lily's eyelashes fluttered. She blinked once, then again, her eyes adjusting to the soft light above her. Confusion crossed her face for only a moment before she slowly turned her head. The first person she saw was Ethan. He smiled gently. "Hi there." Lily studied him quietly, as though making certain he was real and not part of a dream. Then, in a voice still weak from sleep, she asked the question that had lived inside her heart since the day they met. "You are still here?" Ethan reached over and carefully held her hand. "I told you I would be." A peaceful smile spread across Lily's face. It was not the uncertain smile of a frightened child hoping someone might stay. It was the calm smile of someone who finally believed they would not be left behind. A few days passed, and every morning brought a little more strength. Lily walked a few careful steps down the hallway with the encouragement of her physical therapist. Soon those careful steps became longer walks, and each afternoon she proudly reported how many feet she had managed to cover. Ethan celebrated every milestone as though it were the greatest achievement in the world. They played simple card games, colored new pictures together, and read chapters from the children's books found inside the old storage unit. One afternoon, Lily paused while coloring another snowy landscape. "Do you think my mom would be happy?" she asked softly. Ethan looked at the drawing before answering. "I think she would be incredibly proud of how brave you have been. And I think she would be grateful that your heart is finally getting the chance it always deserved." Lily smiled and carefully folded Hannah's letter after reading it again with the social worker. She pressed it gently against her chest before placing it back into its envelope. "I miss her every day," she whispered. "You always will," Ethan answered. "Love does not disappear. It simply finds new ways to stay with us." Weeks later, the hospital organized a small celebration on the day Lily was discharged. Nurses lined the hallway, smiling as she walked confidently toward the front entrance wearing her new winter coat, warm boots, and the knitted blue scarf wrapped comfortably around her neck. The little polar bear rested beneath one arm, while the other hand remained safely inside Ethan's. Snowflakes drifted softly from the sky as the automatic doors opened. Lily stopped just outside the hospital and took one long, deep breath of the crisp winter air. She placed her hand gently over her chest, then looked up at Ethan with bright blue eyes full of wonder. "It does not hurt anymore," she whispered. Ethan smiled through eyes filled with quiet emotion. "No," he said softly. "It does not." Together they stepped forward into the fresh snow, not as two strangers brought together by chance, but as two hearts that had quietly begun healing each other one promise at a time. 1 year later, the first snow of December returned to Minneapolis, covering the city with the same quiet beauty that had brought two strangers together at an old bus stop. This time, however, everything felt different. Laughter drifted through the crisp winter air as children raced across the park bundled in colorful coats, their footprints weaving playful patterns through the fresh snow. Among them ran Lily, her blonde hair peeking out beneath a knitted hat, her cheeks glowing with health as she laughed without stopping to catch her breath. Every few moments she would place a hand over her chest, not because it hurt anymore, but simply because she still found it amazing that breathing could feel so easy. Ethan watched from a nearby bench, a warm cup of coffee resting in one hand while the other absent-mindedly touched the old watch on his wrist. It had never stopped ticking again. Beside him lay a familiar blue scarf, neatly folded after Lily insisted she no longer needed it every day because she had grown stronger. She still kept it close anyway, calling it her lucky scarf. On the other side of the bench rested the little stuffed polar bear, slightly worn now after countless bedtime stories, road trips, and doctor visits. Some things became more valuable with age, not because they remained perfect, but because they carried memories. Across the park, volunteers prepared for the annual Heart for Hope Winter Walk, a community event raising support for children born with heart conditions. This year, Lily had insisted on participating. She had even stood confidently before a room full of families earlier that morning to tell her story. She did not speak about fear. She did not speak about hospitals. Instead, she smiled and said, "Sometimes your heart needs doctors. Sometimes it needs someone who keeps a promise." There was not a dry eye in the room. The event organizer invited Lily onto the small stage once more before the walk began. She held the microphone carefully with both hands, looking toward the crowd before finding Ethan standing quietly near the back. "Last year I thought my heart was broken forever," she said softly. "But people can help fix hearts in different ways. Doctors helped mine beat stronger. Mr. Ethan helped me believe it was worth fixing." The applause that followed was gentle, warm, and filled with something far greater than admiration. It was hope. After the ceremony, Lily ran toward Ethan as fast as her healthy little legs could carry her. Without slowing down, she threw her arms around him. He laughed, lifting her into the air with effortless joy before setting her back onto the snowy ground. "Guess what?" she asked excitedly. "What?" "I ran almost a whole mile during practice yesterday." Ethan smiled proudly. I remember when walking down one hospital hallway felt like climbing a mountain. Lily nodded thoughtfully. Now I want to help other kids who are scared. Ethan looked at her with quiet admiration. I think you already are. Later that afternoon they drove to a peaceful hillside cemetery carrying a small bouquet of white lilies. Together they stood before Hannah Brooks' headstone as fresh snow settled gently across the ground. Lily carefully placed the flowers at its base before unfolding one of her newest drawings. It showed 3 people standing together beneath falling snow, all smiling. She tucked the picture safely beside the bouquet. Hi, Mom, she whispered. My chest does not hurt anymore. I kept my promise. I told someone when I needed help. And he kept his promise too. He never left. Ethan quietly placed Hannah's letter beside the flowers for a moment before returning it to the inside pocket of his coat, exactly where it had remained all year. Some promises were never meant to end. As they walked away hand in hand. Beneath the falling snow, the city lights slowly began to glow in the distance. A year earlier, one little girl had believed she was facing the world alone. One lonely man had believed his heart would never truly live again. Neither of them had been right. Because true wealth was never measured by the size of a bank account or the height of a skyline. It was measured by the quiet decision to stop, to listen, to stay, and to remind another human being that no heart should ever have to carry its pain alone.